Hey, ambassadors, welcome to Speak English with Christina, where you'll have fun becoming fluent in American English. Today is a special interview with the experts episode. It's been a while since we've had one of these episodes, and I thought it was about time. And today's guest is Cara Leopold, who is the online English listening teacher over at leolistening.com. And in her words, she helps bookworms and vocab nerds break free from subtitles so they can stop reading their favorite shows and films and start watching them. And that sounds like a pretty good objective, especially if you're a fan of Dr. House or Gilmore Girls or any other popular TV series. Now, Kara's British, and of course I'm American, so what else? We're talking about accents and understanding different accents, like the difference between the British and the American accents. And just to give you a little preview of some of the highlights of our discussion, we're going to talk about why native speakers don't really speak as fast as you think they do, why syllable stress, like how we put more accentuation on certain syllables, like accentuation, why this syllable stress is essential for understanding. There's a little exaggerated syllable stress for you. We talk about how to understand those squashed expressions, things like I don't know instead of I don't know, or things like I should have asked. I should have asked. You'll hear about non-standard or, incorrect expressions, slang, and between those two, which one is more important for understanding people? Non-standard expressions or slang? And just lots of other very specific characteristics of real spoken English that make it hard to understand, but also how you can recognize these things and understand native speakers better, whether they're British or American. So grab a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever. Sit back and just enjoy our discussion because it'll help you to learn and understand both Americans and Brits better. All right, enjoy.
Okay. Hey, so I'm here with Christina. Hang on, you're going to have to pronounce your surname for me because half of it is French and half of it is American, right?
Yeah, exactly. The French people, they pronounce it rebuffet, but the Americans say rebuffet, and then my American last name, it's Broadus. So rebuffet Brodus or rebuffet Broadus.
I always thought Brodus sounded like French, but obviously rebuffet is more
Very
French.
French.
Very
yeah.
French. Yeah, I like that name, going back to the buffet.
For
seconds.
Exactly. Actually, I learned that in like the local dialect around here, it actually means like unpleasant and someone who complains a lot. So,
That's a lovely surname to have.
Lovely surname, exactly.
Okay. My surname is complicated too because it's Leopold. Cara Leopold, which I think actually is a really cool name. But it's my British name, even though it's not very British.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It sounds like it sounds very like regal, like King Leopold or something.
Yeah. I don't know if that's where it comes from. Well, there's a lot of people though in Belgium and Germany who are called Leopold, so I don't know if somehow I have some kind of connection. Not that I know of, but maybe in the distant past.
You never know. Yeah, right.
Okay, so we're going to chat a bit about some differences. Well, originally it was supposed to be differences between British and American accents, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah. That was the idea.
Yeah, and then we started thinking about it, and we realized that there were maybe more similarities than differences.
Yeah, I think because just going back and forth with you, we realized that there's a lot of there are some differences, of course, but there are actually a lot of similarities as well. And I thought it would be interesting maybe to look at both the differences and the similarities and, to help people kind of understand, I guess, what to look out for and just what to be aware of when they're talking either with British or with American people.
Yeah, definitely, because like one of the first things we both thought, well, not necessarily us, I think it's because students always mention it. They say, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, people speak too fast."
Yeah, yeah, like one of the first things are like, "Oh, I have to talk with Americans, but they speak so fast and I can't understand anything." Um, and I imagine it's the same with British, but in fact I don't have the numbers exactly in my head. But that in fact most languages are spoken pretty much at the same speed. But I guess it's because you're speaking a foreign language, so you need more time to process, so it feels like it's going really fast.
Yeah, that's it. And I think you're not aware of well, when you listen to a language that you don't know very well or you don't know at all, it all sounds really fast because you don't recognize the boundaries between words.
Hmm.
So in
Hmm.
fact, you think they're speaking at a million miles an hour, but they're not. It's just that you're not able to divide it up
Right,
into.
exactly. Yeah. Do you have any like specific examples? Maybe it would be fun to see like the same phrase with a British accent and the same phrase with an American accent. Can you,
To hear if it's actually faster.
well,
Or
just to hear the difference, actually.
what would be a good example? Something like, "Hey, how you doing?"
Okay, yeah. Which in American, hey, how you doing?
To me, they sound
Exactly the same
almost
almost.
identical. Maybe there's some tiny differences on the way we say like certain vowels,
Yeah.
but apart from that,
Let's see. Hey, how you doing?
"Hey, how you doing?"
Yeah, yeah. Okay, it's pretty similar. It sounds like the American one kind of mushes it more together on the how you doing? How it and it sounds like in the British one you can almost hear like how a little more,
Yeah.
but it's still pretty squished.
Yeah, and I think this is the main point that's the big problem, in fact,
Hmm.
that goes like above and beyond any questions of accents is just how we join words together or the sounds that we delete, because that follows pretty much predictable patterns, whether it's British English or American English or Australian English.
Yeah,
Like we both pronounced doing as doing,
doing exactly. Yeah,
and that's like 95% of the time people pronounce the ing endings as in and not
yeah,
ing. That's
right.
just
No, nobody says like I can't even do it. How are you doing? Uh, no, nobody says that.
yeah. And nobody says, "How are you doing?"
Right? Yeah, it's
Be-
like how you doing?
yeah, because it would be weird to emphasize you
How
or
are you doing?
yeah, nobody, emphasizes every single word. That's just a rule of the rhythm of English.
Right.
Again, doesn't matter what accent you're speaking in.
Yeah.
That's how you
Like
say
the
it.
universal rule is that
Yeah.
there are different rhythms, and that's actually a good point because like I don't know if your students have ever said this to you, but sometimes I have students who say like they feel like they're speaking better if they articulate like every word and every sound, like they imagine that it sounds, that it's more correct or that it's just better, and in fact like that actually makes them more difficult to understand, I think, if they're speaking with native speakers, especially.
Yeah, I think especially for natives, yeah. But I think when you're learning English, you feel this pressure to like pronounce everything perfectly, and it's really not necessary, because in fact you're going to sound more natural. Something as simple as just like linking words together, like in
Mhm.
how are you doing, we said how,
Yeah,
and that link is just, if you don't make that link, you're going to sound it's going to sound weird.
yeah, yeah. Like it,
um,
there's actually, going back, you mentioned sort of like changes in sounds and things like that, and I think this is maybe typical of American English, but changing that T to a D. sounds like, we don't say city, but city,
Yeah.
or not 30, but 30.
Yeah.
And there's a story that I always tell because it's a true story with my husband who is French and was talking to my dad about my dad's car. And my husband says, "Oh, I like your Toyota." And like my dad just couldn't understand what he was saying. And the word was Toyota, so it's the same exact word in French and in English. But because my dad was used to or expecting a sound like Toyota, so with the the syllable stress plus the transformation of the T from the D, my husband had to repeat like 3 times. And then my dad said, "Christina, what is he saying?" And like I felt really bad for my husband because he's like, "That's what I said."
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure you've got students who have those same kind of frustrations.
I think especially for French speakers where you've got so many, well, I mean, Toyota is a brand name, but obviously in French and English, there are lots of words that are completely identical or almost identical, like in writing, but the pronunciation is different because, of course, you've got the tonic stress on the English word, and most French speakers will stress every syllable equally. So this is where it gets really frustrating because people don't understand them, even
Right.
though if they wrote the word down, like everyone would
Like,
know
yeah,
what they were talking about. So yeah, and again, that comes back to not so much accent, but actually rhythm, the rhythm of English, the rhythm of, the syllables in a
right.
word and the words in a sentence. So
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking of an example that just something that popped into my head, but the example of like I studied photography at university, because if you write it out, I mean, it's very, very similar between French and English and probably a lot of Latin languages
yeah.
as well. Um, but yeah, I studied photography at university. If you don't have that syllable stress in there, people, if you say like I studied, or sometimes they say I studied photography at university. Yeah, I mean it sounds a little robotic, but also I think
Yeah.
it's going to really make the communication complicated because I don't know, we just don't know what to make of all of these accentuated syllables.
Yeah, we don't know how to process it. It doesn't sound, especially if you speak to native speakers who don't speak French or don't
Right.
speak any other languages and aren't
Yeah.
used to interacting with non-native speakers of the language. Like, yeah, they don't know how to how to deal with that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good point because I think a lot of sometimes when you're speaking a foreign language and the other person doesn't understand you, you automatically think that it's like your fault. Like, oh, I must have done something wrong. And yet maybe you did mispronounce something, but also I always say that when you're communicating in a foreign language, the two people have to try to meet in the middle, meaning, okay, you've learned the foreign language, but the native speaker also has to be a little indulgent and be flexible and I think a lot of times, like you said, native speakers who don't have that experience of learning another language or speaking a lot with people who have learned English as a foreign language, they don't do that. And so it's not the French or the Spanish person's fault, but it's the native speaker who actually needs to do some adapting as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big issue, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Now, what about some things that change? Some sounds that change, like we talked about. How are you? Gonna is a really famous one.
Yeah.
Are there any? Can you think of any? I guess typically British changes in the sounds. Are there any that are
Ah,
key or?
that are different to American ones. That's a good point because I don't know. It is. I don't know. That's a good one, but I mean that's the same.
Yeah.
Do we say gonna because we got that from you, or would that have happened anyway with British
Mm,
English? Because going to, we know already that the ing tends to disappear often, like T sounds disappear all the time from English. So maybe,
Mm,
yeah, I don't know if there are any. I think a lot of them do come from American English though, because like
yeah.
you mentioned, I'm going to being reduced right down to ama,
Yeah.
which for me that's an American thing. It's not really even if maybe British people are starting to use it, it's not,
Mm.
originally.
Organically British or something. Like maybe
No,
comes from exposure to movies or series or things like that.
yeah, well, definitely. I think all those kinds of changes flow in that direction, like American to British. So we start saying things the same. It's more likely that we're going to pronounce the way you do than
Yeah.
even with the success of like Downton Abbey. I don't think American people have started speaking like
Picking
Maggie
up those
Smith and
British.
those,
Yeah.
yeah, that kind of that really, actually, that's a good point. In Downton Abbey, one thing, and this is what my boyfriend does when he like mocks the way British speakers speak French. He
Yeah.
aspirates all the consonants like t, p. He makes them really aspirated,
Oh,
and
right. Yeah.
he says that's how I speak when I speak French. It's not
Oh,
true,
right.
but
So like
he's just
the British accent is there present in the French language that you're speaking.
yeah, so he says that that would be a sign of a British person speaking French would be really aspirated t and p,
Oh,
even
right.
more so than an American speaker. Because like British people
Right.
speak really much more
British
aspirated
people.
people. So if you want,
Yeah.
that's one way to make your accent sound more, and that's something to be careful of. Actually, for me, I know that it is in French because in French those sort of T and P sounds you don't let any air out. They're really
Mm.
like tight.
Kind of tight. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to be careful when you're a British speaker not to say je ne sais pas or
Oh, right. Yeah, because
you
then it
know
just sounds like you're completely desperate and frustrated.
you,
And
and British. So if you want to hide it,
yeah.
you have to. So yeah, I guess that's another like little difference, but they always seem to happen on the same kinds of sounds. Like you're saying, so the T sound in American English, it's more like city.
Right.
And
It's a very good American accent there.
do you think so? And it's really funny. I've just been working with some students on an interview between Emma Watson, so the British
Mm.
actress who's famous for playing Hermione in Harry Potter, and
Right.
Ellen, the American comedian on the Ellen
Right.
show. And I was pointing out that often in American English, the T sounds in the middle of words disappear completely.
Yeah.
So
Like
the
20.
classic 20, give
Yeah.
me 20. And I don't think in British English, you might say 20. Have you got 20 quid with like a kind of a glottal stop in the middle, but you wouldn't say 20.
I suppose it's also the vowels that change, but
So in this interview, Ellen said wanted. So instead of wanted,
Right.
wanted. And in the interview, Emma said it the American way too. She said
Yeah.
wanted. And I was like, is she kind of like, is she influenced by Ellen's accent or like living in, I don't know if she lives in the US, but I guess she travels
Probably goes
because,
back and forth a
yeah.
lot. Yeah.
So it was funny to like, to hear that because a British version of that might sound a bit like wanted. I wanted to
Yeah.
go with a glottal stop, and again,
That
like
really strong glottal
and
stop.
like not so nasal. I don't know what it is. Often American vowels sound more nasal, like wanted.
Wanted. Yeah.
If
So
you
then
really,
in fact, wanted. Yeah, like I'm just like doing it and feeling kind of what wanted. The want that
yeah,
it's a horrible sound. It's a horrible sound, but it's all I can feel it right here.
all the air is coming out
Wanted. Yeah.
your
And I
nose.
guess that's like, when you have a cold and your nose is stopped up and you feel like like you can't speak properly because like the sound can't come out of your nose basically because it's stopped up. And so I guess I don't know, maybe if an American has a cold, they should try a British accent and see
Yeah,
if
it would be easier.
yeah,
But even the way you say can't.
yeah,
Yeah,
can't.
and then in British English would be to say can't.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely like that kind of nasal sound for me is kind of an American thing. But again, maybe in Britain in like 50 years, 100 years, we'll all be speaking like
Speaking
that.
American.
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but yeah. So I can't think. Yeah, I think we just copy you.
Yeah, I think, but
So
it's quite funny because I think, for a lot of Americans, anybody who has a British accent is like immediately seen as like, kind of fancy and kind of very well cultured and things. And it's just because of the accent. But, I know that in Britain, there's like a variety of accents. And just from what I've heard, people say, depending on what sort of accent you have, people, they can kind of judge like your class or your background and things like that. But like for us Americans, it's just like it's all one big British accent, and it doesn't matter which one it is, but it sounds very fancy and lovely. But I think there's not just one British accent. Is that right?
No, definitely not. And I think actually it varies an awful lot. I mean, to the extent that like people, they know where you're from, but like within kind of like a couple of mile radius. I mean, that's how kind of, if they're from the same area, they can really pinpoint where you're from. So like originally I'm from Scotland, but I lived in England for a long time, so my accent is a bit mixed. But someone Scottish who's really paying attention would know even what part of Scotland I'm from with an accent, which isn't actually very strong these days.
Yeah,
so that's how, whereas a lot of people are just like, well, Scottish accent, that's just one thing, but like not at all.
Wow. So that's actually really impressive because like in the US, we same thing. We have different accents. Someone from where I'm from in Mississippi, like they tend to talk like this, like, hey, y'all, I'm from Mississippi and we're going to go up to the grocery store and get some biscuits and gravy. And they kind of talk like that. And, someone, of course, from New York, and I'm not very good at a New York accent, but they might talk something like this. Like, hey, y'all, they wouldn't say y'all because it's a northern thing. But what are you guys doing? I'm from New York. And it's a very bad accent. But to say that, the accents are very different, but I'm not sure that we could say like you're from the South or you're from, New York, or maybe you're from the Midwest, but to get it really so
specific,
that's really impressive, I think, in, about British pronunciation.
Yeah, no, I think it can actually, really, like geographically, it's kind of amazing, really. Well, especially if two people are from the same area, like they obviously can really tell. Otherwise, it's just kind of general. Okay, that person's probably from the southwest, this one from the southeast, type thing. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's because it's a smaller country. Obviously the USA is much more vast. So I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's connected to geography.
Maybe it's geographical. I don't know, but
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
But I get the impression that there's maybe a bit less variation apart from, like you say, big kind of trends like Southern, we know is a bit different, or whatever, or New York, the New York accent, which is quite specific in some parts.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's really interesting though, how it's not just the British accent or the American accent, but it's very, nuanced.
Lots of different ones. But then there's like some core things that like always happen in all accents of British English, for instance. So we talked about glottal stops. So that's what we do to instead of pronouncing a t with a nice breathy, lots of breath coming out. Normally we replace it with a sound called a glottal stop. So that's why in British English, people, instead of saying but, people say but.
That's very British.
That's a very British thing. And some people are like, well, that's only certain accents of UK English, but really everybody does it, because when you speak, you haven't got time to say but, that, what. And a lot of students are really shocked when they discover these words are pronounced but, what, that. It's kind of a disturbing, a shock. Because obviously,
I was going to say just a question there, because you're talking about like the glottal stop with the T's and like what being pronounced like what. For example, I'm thinking of an example that I often use, and it's like, what if we articulate it? What are you going to do? Let's say. And in the American accent, that what are you becomes something like what are you?
Yeah. Or even watch it, yeah.
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 And is it the same thing in British then? Does it become the what are you, or does it become something like what are you?
I think it could become what are you, or it could become watch. I think it's more likely to become watcher.
What's you? Okay, yeah.
And I think that's something that students really need to be aware of. For so many questions in English, like do you, for example, is going to become "je" a lot
Yeah,
of the time.
exactly. Do you want to go? Do you want to go
yeah.
out to eat? Yeah.
What are you doing? What you
What you
doing?
doing?
And this is where it gets a bit disturbing because, again, like when you learn English, you learn the question structures are quite hard. And so you're learning to put together the grammar, and you're probably learning like quite a correct pronunciation, like what are you doing? And then, you learn later on that nobody is saying that apart from in sort of textbooks with scripts, because
Right.
the reality is closer to what you,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's maybe one of the I guess the big gaps, is like for someone who's studying English and they're using maybe a course book with a CD or something, it's very scripted and it's very clearly articulated. And then they get out into the real world and they don't hear things like, "Oh, hello, how are you today?" "I'm
Yeah.
fine. How are you?" It's like, "Hey, how you doing today?" "Good. How about you?" And it's just this, nothing like what they learned in school. And so they don't have it's like they just don't have the knowledge of the language, the real world language, to be able to process it or, even to respond in a way that's going to feel natural for the people who are listening. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And like, and again, there's this obsession with like, well, I need to learn more words. I need more phrasal verbs. It's all slang. And in fact, it's not. It's the basic words that you've known since your first day of school in your first English lesson that are actually the ones that sound the weirdest,
Yeah.
or that are hard to catch, or that they get so reduced that they just sound,
like other words.
Yeah, they do,
Yeah.
or they're just impossible to even perceive. It's really hard, and that often happens to the most frequent words. So I think it's frustrating. I've worked with people who have very high levels of spoken English, like basically fluent spoken English, who still can't catch, very fast, spoken British English, especially when there's kind of a regional accent. They just really struggle. So I think that's frustrating too, if you have like a gap between your spoken level and your ability to perceive. It's kind of annoying if you've been learning for a long time.
Yeah. And I think especially it's very like you said, because maybe they're able to communicate very well. They've got a very high level of spoken English, but when it comes to, something my students say all the time is if they have to have a meeting with two Americans and it's like one French or Italian or Brazilian person and two Americans, they're like, if the American is talking to me, it's okay. But when the Americans start talking between themselves, I get lost and I can't follow anything they say. And it's, it can make the student feel really bad about themselves because they're like, but I speak. I have no problem speaking. I can understand John when it's just me and him. And, what's wrong with me? And it's just that they don't have, I guess, that training, in fact, to be able to realize what's happening between the two Americans who are speaking and all of these changes that are happening to the language, basically.
I mean, I guess for a lot of people, it's maybe not something to actually worry about because a lot of their interactions are maybe with other people whose first language isn't English. So the problem isn't going to come up. But I mean, if you want to do things like I work with people who want to understand the TV series they watch. So, most of those are American. You don't really have the choice. You have to learn, what typically happens to the language so that you can follow the dialogue. And I mean, often it's not anything special. It's just the words that but pronounced in a weird way. Sometimes it's a question of kind of cultural references and things like this. Like you can't know that if you haven't lived there. And I struggle with that sometimes in American series. They mention like people or places I've never heard of, You know, I've never lived in the US, so I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, so you don't
Too-
have that reference.
Yeah, too bad. Like,
Yeah.
it's just how it is. Like, it was
Yeah.
probably a funny joke, but I don't, you know.
It's like, I guess it's funny for somebody, but not me because I don't get it.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, sometimes informal language can be an issue, but I don't think it's as much of a problem as, you know, just the really common words that get reduced. Because I think usually if you hear like a kind of slangy or colloquial phrase, you're going to notice it because it will stand out probably.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas
the little words like do and what and are, you're like, oh, those are so basic that, and in fact, when you're reading them, yes, they are basic. But when you're hearing them and they get, you know, crunched in between maybe 5 other words, yeah, it can be pretty hard to find those little words and that
you need them for the bigger meaning, you know. Was it that contraction, was it a negative or not? Because that's going to change the whole meaning of the sentence depending on what, you know,
between like I can do it and I can't do it.
Yeah, like, there's kind of a big difference in meaning. So yeah, you don't need to worry so much, I think, about, you know, slang as well. I think it's worth defining. Like, I think a lot of people worry about, well, this is all slang, that's why I don't understand. But like, it's not. Well, I think people get confused between what slang is and what kind of just chatty, informal language. So I used a fancy word earlier, which was colloquial, and colloquial just means chatty, informal language.
Like everyday language.
Everyday language.
So people use,
Whereas for me, slang is like a kind of like a really new word used by some kind of specific group. So like young people.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Like teenagers in the UK, where I don't even live anymore, like they will use slang that I don't know because I'm 32. I don't hang out with young people. I don't live in the UK. So there's probably some words that they're using on the street that just like older people just don't know.
That you wouldn't know, or someone who's, you know, 30 years older wouldn't know. Yeah.
And maybe one day these words will like cross over into just general informal language. Or maybe not, like,
or they'll just die,
or they'll get replaced by
times.
Because generally, slang is something it's really new, really specific to a group, you know. And some words that were slang have now just become part of the language,
the everyday language. Exactly.
Like I was thinking about the example when I was at school. I guess we could consider this slang. Like we used to use the word safe. Not to mean like safety, security, being protected, but we used to say, for example, oh, that teacher, she's safe. She's well safe. And that just meant that the teacher was cool. So, for example, you could come to class, you hadn't done your homework, but because the teacher was safe, you could like tell her and she wouldn't say,
she'd be like, okay, we'll do it next time.
Yeah, like somebody.
Right. See, that's really interesting, because when you said that, I'm like, I don't know what that means. Because we didn't have that slang expression, I suppose, and I was just like, I'm trying to imagine what it could mean, I think it's a good point to show that even between, you know, two speakers of English, there can be some risk of misunderstanding because of not just the sounds, but because of the vocabulary.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't even know like that use of that word like around the year 2000, 2001. I don't know if it was just our school. Was it all schools in the area? Was it the whole region? Yeah. Was it like, you know, if I had gone to school somewhere else, would they have, you know, it's so specific.
Right.
And I think a lot of the time you're not actually dealing with that kind of slang, like straight off the street, brand new, that even a lot of native speakers wouldn't understand because it's not part of their. I think youth is a good example because like young people tend to create a lot of these new expressions.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's a good point that I think what you said earlier is that a lot of students they think that these reductions like gonna or wanna or shoulda or things like that, they're like, oh, but it's slang language and I don't want to speak slang in my meeting for, you know. So a lot of people that ask like, can I say gonna? You know, if I want to invite someone and I say, I'm gonna get a cup of coffee, is that too slang, informal? If I'm talking to, a potential client I've just met, and I'm like, no, that's exactly what you should say, because that's the way that it makes you sound friendly and
Yeah, definitely.
familiar and, very conversational. So it's a good point to really make that difference between real slang, the youth, trendy vocabulary.
Subculture, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like
And then just the natural changes that happen in colloquial or conversational English, and it's totally different. And they need to focus on
that
the
side of thing,
conversational
yeah,
sounds. Yeah.
and not worry about like the brand new slang terms that people that like 15-year-olds are using on the street. I mean, unless you are a 15-year-old living in the UK,
Living in the US or the
yeah,
UK.
you
Yeah.
probably
Right.
would. Yeah, but it's interesting. Just before we got on here, we were talking about, and you mentioned it at the beginning, like the pressure that people learning English feel to really articulate everything very carefully, and at the risk of sounding maybe like too formal, too kind of robotic almost as well.
Yeah.
And again, if you use this more kind of informal pronunciation, it's going to sound more natural, more friendly,
right.
in a lot of cases, especially if it's a case with a client where you're not presenting something, but you're just saying, hey, it's the break, I'm going to get a coffee, do you want one? That's like fine, and you could articulate a bit more carefully if you're doing a presentation with your slides.
Yeah,
but
which is what we do anyway. I mean, whenever we're in front of an audience and like presenting something, the way of speaking is not the same as during the coffee break.
But that doesn't mean there are no reductions, no. It might just be articulated a bit more clearly because it's a little bit more formal.
Right. Perhaps slower as well.
A bit more slowly,
is gonna, maybe not reduce the number of reductions in the language, but perhaps make them, a little bit more clearly identifiable. Things like that. Right. Okay. Well, I think that this has actually been a really interesting conversation. If you had maybe one piece of advice, maybe we'll wrap it up with the parting piece of advice.
Yeah.
One piece of advice for someone who is trying to, get past that barrier of being able to understand several native speakers who are speaking at the same time. Do you have any piece of advice for these people?
What can they do? You can turn it around, and I think you can make a joke of it, like about the fact that you don't understand, and that also there's the responsibility on them to make a bit of an effort. So I wrote an article for another colleague recently, and I was talking about what do you do when you go to the pub and you're with lots of native speakers and they're speaking very fast, plus you have all the background noise of the pub. And I said you can make a joke of it, like if they're talking about something like so specific that you would never know, like they're talking about, I don't know, TV programs they used to watch on TV when they were a kid. Well, obviously you weren't there, you have no idea, so you can make a joke like, hey, the foreigner doesn't get it, like, can you change the subject or something like this? Just like make it, and
or maybe ask like an like tell me about
tell me about, or I'll tell you about the ones we used to watch, where I'm from, and just gently kind of remind them with some humor that they need to make a bit of an effort. I think just in some situations people forget as well.
Exactly. Especially if the person whose language is not English has a good enough level to be able to communicate fairly, let's say, naturally. I think we do very quickly forget that not everyone has the same cultural background just because they speak the language.
Yeah, exactly. No, unfortunately, it can be a handicap if you speak well.
That's a really good point. So maybe that's a piece of advice. Stop speaking so well.
Start speaking. And maybe try not to worry too much about British versus American versus there are some specific things, like we didn't mention the R sounds that are a bit different, but apart from some really specific things like that, most of the time the things that are causing problems with comprehension are the same across the different accents of English. So it's worth concentrating on that rather than getting obsessed about like
British or American.
Yeah.
Which one should I learn? Well,
Yeah,
learn.
you need a bit of both,
Yeah, and I mean, if you're doing any work, I mean, that's better than no work, rather than maybe worrying so much, like, am I studying the right accent?
Yeah.
Just, whatever you're doing is going to help you in the greater scheme of things. So,
Indeed,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
Cool.
right. Well, Cara, I really enjoyed talking to you, and I really hope that the people, as they're listening, they can actually hear the differences between, like, when I'm speaking and when you're speaking, just because that's one of the joys of English, is all of this rich variety that's out there, definitely.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it's a really good feeling when you realize, that person is British, that person is American.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Okay, great.
Okay, all
well,
right.
thanks so much, and I'll see you soon then.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So that's it. It was a pretty long discussion, but we really wanted to take the time to go into detail and to really get into this subject, because it's such a fascinating subject, pronunciation and comprehension, or at least it's fascinating if you're a language geek like we are. So anyway, if you want to check out what Cara does, and I highly encourage you to do that, her website is leo-listening.com, and the link will be, of course, in the notes below this video, so you can go and check out her work. And if you're really specifically interested in understanding Americans when they speak fast, come over to my website at christinarobafe.com and get your free American Accent Survival Kit to help you start understanding all those little icky aspects of natural spoken English, so that you can not feel like it's so fast and understand a lot better. All right, you guys, thanks so much for sticking with us till the end. I mean, thumbs up for you. Good job. And I will see you next week for a regular episode of Speak English with Christina TV. All right, thanks a lot, guys. See you next week.